asked the Greek Minister of Social Cohesion and Family Affairs what's behind the trend.
Greece has been a migration, let's say, country for many years. So people, they immigrated, they migrated, people left because of economic reasons back in the 60s. We saw this very large flow of people like our grandparents living to the States, going to Germany, you know, fleeing to other countries in order to find a more secure and a stable financial state of play. And of course, this is the older part of the expats. And we saw a large flow of people, the young, dynamic, well-educated, academically credited people that left after 2010, the big financial crisis, almost 500,000 of people left. And these were the people that we were really, you know, focusing hopes on. They went to other countries, mostly around Europe and in the States, and they created their families there.
I am stunningly interested in this subject because I think the future of growth as a GDP model is predicated on having stable population, let alone growing population. I see the demographic problems internationally, and it's been happening for a long time. I used to just worry about the Japanese, and I was worried about the Chinese because of one-child policy. Now I've got to worry about the Greeks especially.
Yeah. You just see the extent of this issue and how it is so widespread. I mean, some of these elements are particular and peculiar to Greece, so we see the remnants.
It's the specific elements, because I'm interested why.
Yeah, so there are the remnants still of the Greek financial crisis. As the Minister was saying there, a lot of people either migrated away or delayed having a family, or, of course, there's the urbanisation trend where people were moving to the big cities. So now around 50% of the population live in Athens or Thessaloniki, these big cities. And it's meant that there's huge areas of the country that are just completely unpopulated. So it's led to this proliferation of ghost
towns. It's a problem for young people on the islands as well.
Yeah, exactly. On the islands, which are very tourism focused, so it means that these people have very seasonal work.
And they can't afford the properties there because of all the rich tourists. And I know several of our viewers own properties on these islands.
Yeah, and then you see these other countries that have come out with bans against Airbnbs and the likes because it has driven up the cost of housing too. So it's really a very widespread issue. And like I say, there are certain things that are very specific to Greece, and you can see it fleshed out. I mean, you just wander around parts of the country that are completely depopulated now, and they've led to this proliferation of so-called ghost towns and villages that have almost nil or totally zero populations because people have either migrated away or they realise that there isn't the infrastructure there anymore, that the schools are abandoned, so people are no longer raising their families there.
So sad.
And the older population has died out, and then we see this huge decline in the birth rate. So Greece has one of the lowest fertility rates in Europe, nearing sort of the equivalent of Japan and Korea.
Which is extraordinary because the idea, I mean, cliches, and you know, I grew up going, I love Greece, and you think about the big families, you think about dare I say it, the great Anthony Quinn film where this is before your time. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think
Zorba, which is
exactly.
the size of the family, enormous. So you think about that, and actually Greek women just like, no, sod it, I'm not going to produce loads of children for the Greek population demographics. I actually want to go become a professional.
Yeah, I mean, I think those family values are still there and they're still strong, and you see that in the kind of the behaviours of people. But like you say, people are prioritising their professions, and with the Greek financial crisis, they weren't able to necessarily start these families, and it did instigate this kind of psychological change. But some of it predates that. I mean, the minister there again was saying that the start of this was around the 50s and the 60s when people were migrating to the States and starting their families there. Then another economic downturn in the 80s, which led to a decline at that point in the birth rate. And now we see far fewer women of childbearing age
one more question,
who are able to do
which I don't know if you have an answer for this one. But Greece Actually, no, do you know what? I'll leave that one. Karen, you've got a question.
I was just going to ask how are we ending up here when we've had hybrid working, we've had remote working, and there was that whole lifestyle change if you wanted to go to sunny shores and have lifestyle.
But ghost towns don't have full fibre. That's the problem, is it? And I imagine this is part of the solution from the minister as well. If you want people to stay in these rural communities, you've got to offer them 21st century technology. So it's going to cost a lot of money to put the infrastructure in place so people can actually work in these lovely places.
Yeah, and they've announced, so the minister there who's in charge of families and social cohesion, they've announced 20 billion euros of funding up until 2035, and this is to support families especially, so tax breaks, child support, increased parental leave and things like that. So there's that element. But of course she's not sort of closed-minded to the fact that it has to be cross-departmental and there has to be incentives to invest in the infrastructure and things to enable these more remote areas to also be able to support families as well as the bigger cities.
As well, because think of the country in Europe, in the EU, which has had the biggest immigration challenge from the terrible events in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Think of the country, and you could probably argue Italy, and I get that, but it's Greece. Greece has been on the front line.
Yeah.
So you've got tens of thousands, if not more, people coming in from the east because of the devastating wars in Syria and elsewhere. And you've got a falling Greek population. It is a toxic brew for nationalism.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, you know, you just wonder how the government is going to think about this. I mean, the Prime Minister's warned of existential population collapse. They're warning that the population could decline by a quarter by 2050, but then you see this influx from elsewhere.